There's a strange pattern you see in people who self-sabotage. They don't fall apart when life is hard. They fall apart when life starts to work. When things are bad, they move fast. They decide quickly. They survive. But when progress shows up, when momentum builds, they slow down. They delay. They distract themselves. They do things that quietly make success harder. And later, they don't say, "I didn't want this." They say, "I don't know why I did that. This is just who I am." That's the mistake. Because self-sabotage rarely feels like sabotage. It feels like personality. This isn't about fixing you. It's about identifying a pattern. The psychology of people who self-sabotage and why they often don't even realize they're doing it. Psychology and the system logic we see in solo leveling all agree on one thing. The system doesn't care who you think you are. It only records what you repeat. System initialized. People who self-sabotage don't think they're sabotaging. Listen to how they describe themselves. "I'm inconsistent. I always fall off. I'm just not disciplined." These aren't behaviors anymore. They're labels. Once a behavior becomes a label, it stops being questioned. And that's how self-sabotage hides, not as something you do, but as something you are, which is very convenient because you can't argue with who you are. Psychology calls this an attribution style. How the mind explains why things happen. So, when actions don't match goals, the brain takes a shortcut. Instead of asking, "Why did I avoid that?" it says, "That's just me." You stop observing. You stop adjusting. You accept the pattern as fate. It's like saying, "I'm bad at mornings," instead of noticing that every night ends at 2 a.m. One sounds permanent. The other sounds fixable. But if you believe the first one, you never check the second one. The system doesn't accept that answer. It doesn't see identity. It sees actions. Repeated, logged, stored. System check. When things fall apart, do you blame the situation or do you blame who you are? People who self-sabotage don't struggle with starting. They struggle with continuing. Here's what usually confuses them. They tell themselves, "I always mess up." But if you look closely, that's not true. They don't mess up at the beginning. They don't mess up when things are falling apart. They mess up after something works, after a good week, after progress, after someone notices. That's when sleep slips, focus drops, old habits return. Not because they're tired, because pressure changed. In psychology, this is called threat appraisal, the brain deciding whether a situation feels safe or dangerous. Momentum raises the stakes. Before momentum, failure is expected. After momentum, failure feels louder. The brain recalculates. More progress means more attention. More expectation, more to lose. So it looks for relief. Not long-term relief, immediate relief. And that's where self-sabotage comes in. Self-sabotage isn't about wanting to fail. It's about wanting the pressure to stop. When people let discomfort make decisions, reason steps aside quietly. Nothing dramatic happens. You just stop doing the thing that was working. It's like finally saving money, then suddenly buying things you don't need. Or finally building focus, then staying up late for no reason. Not because you forgot your goal, but because the goal started feeling real. Only the weight changed. The brain isn't saying, "Let's fail." It's saying, "Make this feeling go away." The system doesn't ask why the weight feels heavy. It watches when behavior shifts. System check. Do your worst habits show up when life is hard or when things start going right? Feelings feel honest. That's why they're dangerous. People who self-sabotage trust their emotions too much. Not because they're dramatic, not because they're impulsive, but because emotions feel like truth. When motivation is high, everything feels possible. When motivation drops, everything feels pointless. So, decisions start following mood. If it feels heavy, they stop. If it feels exciting, they go. If it feels uncomfortable, they avoid. Over time, progress depends on how they feel that day, and feelings are unreliable coworkers. They show up late, they exaggerate problems, they quit without notice. Psychology calls this emotion-action fusion, when feelings are treated as instructions instead of information. Fear feels smart. Doubt feels protective. Discomfort feels like danger. But emotion is not instruction, it's a signal. The problem starts when people treat signals like commands. Once that happens, long-term goals lose every argument to short-term comfort. The system doesn't react to emotion. It waits for input. It's saying, I'll work when I feel motivated, which is like saying, I'll brush my teeth when I feel inspired. Technically possible. Practically, not great. The feeling feels real. The conclusion is wrong. People who self-sabotage don't lack discipline. They confuse feelings with facts. And once that happens, every uncomfortable emotion starts steering the wheel. System check. When discomfort shows up, do you treat it as information or as instructions? Most people think weakness is what gets punished. It isn't. Hesitation is. People who self-sabotage often say they're not ready yet. But readiness isn't the issue. They've done the task before. They know what to do. They've even succeeded. What stops them is the pause. The moment where action feels uncomfortable and waiting feels safer. Hesitation looks responsible until timing matters. Psychology shows that inaction under pressure is often chosen to avoid discomfort, not because the task is impossible. Fear doesn't ruin outcomes. Delay does. Not dramatic delay, not obvious delay. The quiet kind that looks like waiting. The brain calls it being careful. The system calls it no response. The system doesn't punish fear. It doesn't punish doubt. It continues. No input received is still input. It's the job application you almost send. The habit you almost lock in. You tell yourself, I'll do it when I'm more confident. But confidence doesn't arrive first. Action does. And when action doesn't happen, the opportunity quietly moves on. No warning email, no dramatic music, just gone. System check. Think of the last opportunity you missed. Did you not act because you couldn't or because you waited? People who self-sabotage often feel like life is happening to them. It just happened. I couldn't help it. But if something just happens, there's nothing to examine. And if there's nothing to examine, nothing changes. So the cycle repeats. Not because they don't care, but because that explanation removes the moment of choice. The choice has always existed. Not before the emotion, after it. Psychology draws a clear line here. Responsibility doesn't mean blame. It means recognizing the moment where behavior begins. You might not control emotions, but you do have control over what happens next. Self-sabotage continues when people treat that moment as automatic. Responsibility starts when they see it as a response. Self-sabotage loses its grip with recognition. The moment someone realizes, this isn't who I am, this is what I do when pressure hits, that shift is small, but it changes everything. Because behaviors can be interrupted. Identities feel permanent. The system doesn't argue with your feelings. It records what follows them. What happens next is logged. That's where responsibility lives. System check. When pressure hits, does behavior feel automatic or observable? People don't stay stuck because they don't understand the pattern. They stay stuck because the pattern gets easier to run. Every time a response repeats under pressure, the brain needs less effort to choose it again. Psychology calls this behavioral reinforcement. Not because the behavior's good, but because it's familiar. The brain is an efficiency machine. It prefers what it knows over what might work better, especially in high arousal states. stress, fear, urgency. In those moments, the brain doesn't experiment. It defaults. That's why self-sabotage feels automatic over time. Not dramatic, not intentional, just fast. The response fires before you finish the thought. And once a pattern becomes the default, awareness alone isn't enough to stop it. The system isn't tracking your insight. It's tracking frequency. How often the same response appears in the same situation under the same pressure. That's how patterns harden, not overnight, through repetition. Pattern confirmed, pattern reinforced, pattern stabilized. Final system check. When pressure rises, does your response feel chosen or already in motion? Most people think self-sabotage means they don't want success. That was never true. They want it. They just learned at some point that pressure wasn't safe. So when momentum appears, the old response activates, not to destroy, to protect. And while you were listening to this, the system was tracking your answers, not to judge, to classify awareness. For each system check, one answer signaled a self-sabotage pattern. The system logged it. The system has enough data. Your rank reflects how visible the pattern is to you. B rank, self-observant. C rank, pattern-aware. D rank, noticing. E rank, unaware. No rank is good, no rank is bad. But the lower the rank, the more invisible the pattern. You thought this was a test of motivation. It wasn't. It was a test of recognition. The system never wanted your intentions, only your response.